International has something to say, folks, and they want us to know about it. Now, when I was a wee nipper at school and I was studying politics, I was taught about Amnesty International as a bastion of liberty-oriented perspectives. They really cared about individual rights, and they were a very good group. And that was the perspective I had on them for a number of years, along with a couple of other similar NGOs, pressure group organizations. However, for anyone who's kept up with their output in recent years, and particularly around the war in Israel, I think you can no longer maintain such a perspective. And that's what we're going to be talking about today on the reality show. I've got Marco and Richard with me and Alejandro. How's everyone doing?
Very good. Yeah.
Lovely. So we're going to talk a bit about what they've just had to say in the news recently, and then this report that they've put out as well. So Marco and Richard, do you want to tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, before we delve into the content of the report itself, I'd like to remind people who's the author. Amnesty International. Amnesty International is an NGO founded in 1961 here in Britain. Its current international headquarters is based here near Islington, quite a well-off area of London, and they also have a branch which only covers the UK, so Amnesty International UK, which is in Shoreditch. So if you are familiar with London, that's a quite swanky area, fairly trendy and expensive. But anyway, this NGO is actually a multinational of altruism, profiteering, and fat cats. In fact, it's staffed by about 68 people FTE, according to the latest reports made in 22, and with a total budget 24 million, 4 millions for staff only, which makes the average salary 60,000 pounds each. Of course, there are 21 people paid more than 60k. 3 people paid more than 100k, and 1 person, presumably CEO, this Sasha Deshmukh, is the CEO for the UK. You couldn't make it up, Deshmukh, whose main purpose in life is actually to produce this kind of big reports, which are effectively the typical call to arms for all the progressive woke and lefty activists out there who want to use the material produced at Amnesty International to pursue their own campaigns. Of course, it's only fair to say that when Amnesty International was founded about 60 years ago, it was a serious organization. It used to fight for prisons of conscience, against death penalty, against torture, against miscarriage of justice. And they were fairly well regarded as a decent organization. I remember, I think perhaps in the 80s, there was even U2 were great supporters, or in the 90s must be, great supporters of Amnesty International in the campaigns. However, in the latest years, in 2018, there was a big scandal within its staff because they were accused of having a culture of bullying, harassment, sexism, and racism. So much so that in 2022, there was a report done by a consultancy, an external consultancy, who found that racism and anti-Semitism were ingrained in the organization. And they actually said something like, anti-Semitism is so ingrained in the DNA of the organization, which is hard to justify the claim that they are the leading anti-racist organization. So I think that was quite damaging. And to get a state-of-the-art for the rights report from these guys, I think is pretty preposterous. But we know nowadays that facts don't really alter people's ideas. So we're here and we have this report, and
yeah. I always think of the organisation as the career choice for the student protesters who've done with their sit-ins and spraying their slogans on war memorials and want to make it a full-time job of agitating the world and telling it what to do. And that's certainly what they've been doing. I think they're certainly PR agents for like moral greyness and altruism, because while they pose as champions of things like rights and justice and freedom, they're actually undermining all three concepts a lot of the time, treating them as stolen concepts, not understanding the root of those things properly. And so they come up with this annual report, which is a country by country based report, which chooses to point out that they're like truffle for vice in every country that they look at. So they can make sure they can find what they consider to be the worst elements of every country and stick them in a report. And therefore, you end up with a report that has the same amount of text or a similar amount of passage given over to Iran as it does to the US or to the UK. And that moral relativism that arises from that is part of the problem, because and of course it's picked up in each country, certainly in the UK by organisations like the Guardian, etc., and describes it as a damning report, the damning Amnesty International report on the UK. And I'm sure that's repeated across all of the Western world, but of course it doesn't recognise the difference between the best countries in the world, the freest countries in the world, and it certainly doesn't recognise individual rights as the basis of freedom.
Alejandro?
I will start by also giving my opinion on Amnesty International. And from all the institutions and NGOs that we have discussed in the past, the one that brings into my mind is BTS. I think in a sense, you could say that Amnesty International is the least bad, but from another sense, and I think in a real sense, it's even worse, because I think one of the things that it gives that relies on the prestige of Amnesty International is that in the past, and probably some of the people that still work there have a real and genuine notion of trying to help bring out more rights to people. But that prestige, that capacity of genuine care is conflated by either worse people or worst notions within the same people that bring about really crazy stuff. But it is only because they care about genuine rights to some extent that it gives the credibility to the institution, and why it makes it so damn terrible for anyone who is really concerned about that. And that's another notion of the sanction of the sanctioning the evil, according to taking into account one of the concepts of Ayn Rand. Now, if you don't believe me, just let me quote you one title that was published in October 25 of last year, and that's regarding the Iranian women that quote, Iranian women and girls face further violations of their rights under compulsory veiling bill. So these are people who you would say, oh, they care about the Iranians. They're one of the few NGOs who have made statements about this. But when one goes to the most recent press release about the report, there's no single word about that. They even talk about the Dominican Republic in the press release. No mention about Iran. Now, if you also go into the report and see what is their notion about Palestine, you see a whole-fledged list of all the violations of rights that both the PLO and Hamas have made, to freedom of speech, of assembly, of even pollution. And the record is depressing. Yet, what you see at the beginning of the report is that they condemn Israel for that, because they are an apartheid state. That's what they say. So, but what I'm trying to say is, if it wasn't because there is this care or these statements about violations of rights, then Amnesty International would be just a crazy set of people which complain about everything that Israel does. But because there is a mixed thing over here, that's when it's peril comes from, because you can be enticed by some of their truths in their lives and be carried by a really evil movement.
Yeah, and that's why I made the point that in the past that they were a force for good, no doubt about that. They might not be perfect, but the motivation behind it was good. And of course, pointing out that there are breaches of human rights across the world, it is good. However, the way you present it, as I said earlier on, because the average salaries are so high, are we really to believe that these people are interested in ending the breach of human rights? I mean, in a fair world, these guys wouldn't have a job. So, I question that in the first place. But the real sickening thing of this report is the kind of equivalence that every country is presented under the same light. So you have violations in UK, Ireland, Italy, France, at the same level as those in Iran. If you read the Iran paragraph, the Iran section, it actually goes quite a long way and describes serious violation, attacks on women, attacks of LGBT community, attacks of non-Muslims. And we're talking not just attacks, but imprisoners, torture, and death penalty. In Iran, they kill people for not believing in the crap about the sky and the ghosts and all the priest stuff. So and that's, I think, the stuff you cannot forgive them for presenting the information as you were like comparing Apple and Samsung. That's totally unfair, and that's totally dishonest in my view.
And just to match that, to match that, what Marco just said about Iran to what it says about the UK, and the equivalents to torture in the UK are things like delaying the phasing out of certain gas boilers, or having licenses for fossil fuels, and the dominance of tech companies is a regular thing. They have a pop out. Apparently, some of the ethnic violence in Ethiopia was caused by Facebook algorithms, or at least exacerbated by it. That's the sort of steps they're always taking, always dragging the West into it, when of course those same Facebook algorithms are the kind of things that promote the altruistic sludge that Amnesty International is part of, and they receive an equal amount of airtime and benefit from Facebook as they do to have it as a source to poke fun at and to denigrate.
Yes, and it's a recurring theme on the shows, really, that what we're talking about so much is moral equivalence. Because I think in the minds of the pro-Palestinian protesters, although some of them want to claim that Palestine is the morally superior side, for a lot of the people who kind of can't fully be honest with themselves, I think they just need to try and get it so that, look, these sides are just, there's bits of bad on both sides, bits of good as well, bits of good and bad. They're just the same. And so that when Israel is going to war and doing whatever, it's an evil thing to be doing. And yet this is something that Rand was very articulate on, that any kind of equivalence drawn between something that's good and something that's evil serves to work to the destruction of the good, to the denigration of the good, and to the enlargement, in a sense, of the evil. And it shouldn't surprise people in a way that this is so much of what we're seeing. And I agree that there's a sense in which it's a shame that it's coming from a group like Amnesty International, because they have such good PR around them. If people see Amnesty International, denounces X, I think that carries a lot of moral weight in people's mind, because in a sense, what Amnesty kind of brands itself as doing is campaigning on moral rights issues. And that's perfectly proper, except once you stray away from the proper kind of subject matter, which you're meant to be concerning yourself with there, then you get into doing very tremendously evil things. And as you say, Alejandro, right out at the beginning, whilst in the report, they do list a number of the evil which is done by the Palestinian authorities. The first thing that they have to say is that Israel is an apartheid system, that Israel, blah, blah, blah. I don't think I saw it in the report, but I wouldn't be surprised elsewhere if they were saying that Israel was committing genocide. And the thing that they denounce Israel for is for having a flagrant disregard for international law. Now, if we think about what it is that Israel's having a flagrant disregard for within the international law, really, international law serves just to tie the hands behind the backs of countries which need to go to war, of good countries that need to go to war at certain times, so that they can't do it. So that if they were to in any way exercise their unconditional right to self-defense having been attacked, they will suddenly be in violation of it, even if, like Israel, they bend over backwards to try and do things to keep within the bounds of it. They will always be in violation of it. And I think that anyone paying close attention to this topic should really see this and think that, yes, any good justified country needs to have a flagrant disregard for international law at this point.
Yeah.
But Mark and Richard?
Yeah, I mean, they put lots of weight on the international law side of things. In fact, they use the definition of human rights from the Human Convention or something or other. So, and I think a UN thing, isn't it? But they also, at the same time, ignore the fact that the same international law gave origin to the state of Israel. So, if it's good on one side, it's to be good on the other side, international law, isn't it? But again, people watching this, don't take our words. Just go onto the website of Amnesty International. You will see a few campaigns. You will see a campaign for a ceasefire in Gaza, but you will not see a campaign to ask Hamas to stop, first of all, terrorizing the people in Gaza, and second, attacking Israel on a regular basis. And third, or probably even more important, return of the hostages, which have been held for now 202 days. You cannot just hide behind the Nobel Peace that Amnesty International won in 77, I think, and pretend you're still the same institution that cares about human rights, because you cannot choose to ignore certain facts and just push your agendas. I mean, today's even climate crisis and inequality is one of the campaigns that this racket is running, and to me is totally devaluing and totally destroying any good work that Amnesty might have done in the past.
Yeah, it ends up being might pretending to be right, really. I mean, it's we know that all dictatorships need their propaganda, and in some ways, when they're arguing for more and more regulation, and they want regulation to be ahead of technological progress and all kinds of things like that, it feels like that they are dictators who need the propaganda of a noble cause to hide their real motives, which is kind of a one government, one collectivized rights is the view to it. They want to bury the individual under collectivized rights. That's the outcome of what they're saying. I think one comment here that they said on the UK, and I want to bear in mind that this is like a 418-page report. So we're really only cherry picking out of it, and it covers 150 countries. It's divided by countries, which is part of the problem, as I say. And because it's divided by countries in such a way, it treats things as isolated examples in different geographies, and therefore doesn't draw any principles together about what unites some of the problems that are genuine in the world, or what is the cause of them. But and of course, it also at the same time blames the West for problems in the rest of the world, and thinks the West should do more to solve those problems. That is the underlying nature of it, that the West should, march in and solve everything. Here's a classic example. They condemn the UK, this is a quote, condemns the UK for failing to use its leadership role in the UN to prevent human rights violations. Okay, well, who else has a leadership role in the UN? Are we talking about the 5 permanent members here? Does that include China and Russia having a leadership role in the UN to prevent human rights violations? Or is it just the UK and the US that should be doing that? Because obviously, from our perspective, the UN shouldn't exist. The countries that are dictatorships and communist dictatorships, etc., like Russia and China, certainly shouldn't be on it. But what are you doing? You're criticizing the UK for not ensuring that the world is free of human rights violations. It's implausible.
Alejandro?
Yeah, one of the ways in which not the report, but the press release can be interpreted is a shaming of the actors or the main actors in the world stage, but mainly the better actors. Yes, it condemns Russia. Yes, it condemns very moderately China and what's happening in Myanmar. But the target here is Israel, the US, and the UK. If you don't believe me, like here's the statement, quote, Israel's flagrant disregard for international law is compounded by the failures of its allies to stop the indesirable civilian bloodshed meted out in Gaza. Many of those allies were the very architects of that post-World War II system of law, unquote. So they're saying, hey, you created this system. Don't blame me. You are the ones who created international law via the UN and so on. Now behave as you meant it. And to some extent, Amnesty International is to some extent in the right. They are the UK, the US are the architects of the post-World War II system. However, what we have to do is reject that system, push it away, because it makes no sense. And the ones who, and contrary to what is usually believed by people on the left, it's the better people who are harmed by this kind of system and rulings, especially people in the West, but not only people in the West, but the people who are harmed by the authoritarian regimes which are flagrantly benefited by these international laws.
I don't know, there was a bit at the top of the report, I don't know if you guys caught it, where they show an image of the Palestinian territories, let's say, and they highlight them in yellow. And they have a little disclaimer at the underneath it that says, Amnesty International takes no positions on issues of sovereignty or territorial disputes. These borders are based on UN geospatial data. Now, I think most people will kind of read that and gloss over it and not really take it into account. But if you think about what a group which is meant to be advocating for rights should be doing, it should care about sovereignty and territorial disputes, particularly in this situation, very, very much. I appreciate that in a sense what they're saying is, look, if you don't like where those borders are drawn, we're not making any statement by that. But when it's a difference between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, or Israel and Hamas, or Israel and the PLO, any of the various incarnations of the Palestinian representatives over the years, you very much need to take a perspective on that, because if Israel were to be subsumed beneath any of those organizations, then suddenly there would be a huge outpouring of rights violations, murder, perhaps genuine apartheid, the rights of minorities being violated, women, gay people, racial minorities, whatever. And yet groups like this don't want to take any position. Now, I guess maybe I'd be interested to see if you guys think this. Maybe it's okay if you just want to be a group that just lists down all of the various rights violations that take place in the world and take no stance on it. But I would think to really fulfill that job, you actually do need to take a stance. You can't just be kind of hands off in any way like that. I think it points to part of the problem with Amnesty, that they want to say, look, we take no position on the conflict. We're just scribbling down all the various instances of them. Because when they then present them in the report, they present them as if they're two equivalent sides. And that's actually doing harm in the long run to their goal of protecting rights, I would put it. But Mark and Richard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if they just wanted to highlight the breach of human rights, they could just present a spreadsheet. But going down the route of a report, it's because they want to have a certain editorial input, because they have an agenda, they have a position, whether they admit it or not, and it comes through so clearly. Just look at the Israeli section, when they effectively commenting on the fact that some people, I think they're referring to the far right nutter religious people in Israel, are now in the cabinet and they have positional power. Well, first of all, Israel in a state of war right now has been attacked by the government of Gaza, Hamas, and so they formed a unity government. And of course, unity government includes all sorts of people. But even beyond that, the kind of statement they come up with, like the F-35, condemning UK because the F-35s given to Israel to combat Hamas probably contain parts made in the UK. It's like, talk about splitting hair here. First of all, you're not going to find parts made in Gaza or in Iran or some of the shitholes around the world, because they haven't got the ability, the technology, and certainly the predisposition, productivity to do anything like that. But to condemn a country for being technologically advanced and creating machinery that yes, it's used for war, but why is it used for war? Because we are constantly under attack by these troglodytes, cave-dwelling savages who want to destroy civilization. It's not like your choice. And then all the kind of equivalence that they make about matching the UK is effectively bad because because effectively they support Israel and at the same time they protest against Russia. Here you're making the equivalence that the attack on Israel, the self-defense of Israel, is the same as Russia attacking Ukraine. Effectively, you have to condemn Israel for defending itself in the same way that you condemn Russia for attacking Ukraine. This is absolutely evil. At this point in time, to make a statement like that is just evil. And there's no other excuse for that.
The point that Marco mentions there about the F-35s, they mention specifically that they think about they estimate that about 15% of the parts in an F-35 could come from the UK. And the inference being that we shouldn't supply those parts. And therefore that a country shouldn't be able to defend itself. It shouldn't receive the aircraft necessary to defend itself, no matter how it's attacked, whether it's from Iran, as we saw a couple of weekends ago, or whether it's the events of October the 7th. And there's all sorts of things that they focus on. You could go to any country and pick out ludicrous stuff, to be honest. In the UK, they mention specifically the Prevent programme, which is a programme run by the British government, which is not wholly effective, not particularly great in a number of ways, but its aim is to reduce terrorism. It's to try and nip terrorism in the bud and make sure that all of the groups and sources of terrorism are that people, in all sorts of places where, like mosques and imams and stuff, are being how can I put it? Don't want to say monitored, but making sure there's a network of people being cautious about what is being said and what are the things that could lead to terrorism, trying to nip the source of terrorism in the bud, essentially. And if Amnesty had their way, it looks like the entire program would be cancelled, and we would simply have no intelligence whatsoever and simply wait for things to happen, and then claim that we should have known about them afterwards. I mean, it's impractical. And then when it comes to, they're always agitating for other people, whether it's terrorists in prison or in various countries, or even civil acts of disobedience. They seem wholly in favor of many cases, particularly when it comes to people from Just Stop Oil or those kind of environmental groups. For example, they criticized Italy. We had a quick look at the Italy section. They criticized Italy for the government considering bringing in a law preventing acts of disobedience that damage heritage buildings from being spray painted or damaged for protests and stuff. And that apparently is the same as damaging human rights through torture, it would seem, through this equivalence. This is the problem, that this human rights term becomes a rubbery term that seems to encompass anything of the day that is considered virtue signaling or virtuous, including all the gender stuff as well. And in the end, it dilutes its meaning for that.
Yes, and just the way this report is being reported on. So this is their annual report for anyone who's not gone and seen it. And as we're saying, comments on a wide number of things. But this is the way this is being reported is leading really with the Israel side of things, and then also talks about the various other countries involved. And this is the comment that came from Amnesty as a kind of summation of how things are going in the year, I guess. So they said, history will look back and say that we gave succor to those governments with authoritarian regimes and others who want to avoid the rule of law. It is deeply worrying, and its repercussions could be felt for years to come. Amnesty International's report paints a dismal picture of alarming human rights repression and prolific rule breaking, all in the midst of deepening global inequality, superpowers vying for supremacy, and an escalating climate crisis. Now, I think in a sense, certainly the first part of that is right, that history will look back and say that we gave succor to governments and authoritarian regimes who want to avoid the rule of law. however, looking at Amnesty's perspective on it, Israel is one of these countries which is at fault, just as bad as any of the others. And they take no perspective on, well, Israel is a fundamentally free and rights respecting country which has some problems but is moving in the right direction overall. But so they take no perspective on that and treat them again as if they're just equivalent to any of these other little despots. Like Myanmar is one of the countries that gets mentioned. Myanmar, which I think is still under the rule of the military junta that deposed Aung San Suu Kyi a few years ago. So it's a completely just disgusting and reprehensible perspective to take, even though I think in a sense what she just said there is correct, because they're lumping in the good countries and the bad countries and treating them all the same. And the condemnation of the UK, putting aside the immigration law for a second, they can, as you guys were saying, they're condemning the UK for supporting Israel in these circumstances. So they'll lump in people who are supporting the good countries as well. And that kind of moral neutrality, again, just can't be allowed in any respect. So let's just go to a couple of super chats before we continue. So we have $3.99 from Jonathan. Thank you so much, Jonathan. And then $5 from Stefan. Thank you, Stefan. And then another $2.99 from Jonathan. Thank you, Jonathan. And $10 from Mumu Jo. Thank you, Mumu. So Marco and Richard, what else did you guys think about this report? I mean, do you think that people, in a sense, do you think people take it the way that we do? Because I sometimes wonder about these kind of things, because certainly the leaders of countries take notice of this kind of stuff, and very much they echo the same kind of lines that, in a sense, Israel is just as bad as the other countries. Do you get any sense that people in the UK where we are just generally disagree with that? Because it's something that I find hard to put my finger on it. Do you think they recognize that Israel is better, or do you think that they swallow this line as well?
I think most people will see the report comes from Amnesty International, a recognized brand. So they fall for the fallacy of authority, really. They believe everything that's presented to them because it looks so official. And they will fail to read between the line and look at the statement and realize what actually they hide. Phrases like, we found in this last year flagrant rule breaking, like the one from the Russian forces, the breaking committed by the Russian forces during the invasion of Ukraine. Now, are we saying that the rule breaking is done in the way you invade a country? Because I consider invading a country the biggest rule breaking in the book, but these people don't see it like that clearly, and also the kind of thing that sneak through the report, things like we've seen things deterioration of human rights in Sudan, Ethiopia, and Myanmar, and then they actually admit that China is funding Russia and Myanmar during the breach of human rights. And again, they hardly condemn China as such. And again, they carry on, breaches of human rights for women and LGBT. We see the number of attacks growing. Well, narrow down what the problem is. Try and extract from your own report what the causes are and name them. To just make this big minestrone soup of stuff that in isolation looks good, but as a whole, it actually excuses things like China, Iran, and all the kind of violation that they cry so much about. And I fear people just look at it and think, oh, look at aren't they great that they're doing this report every year, and they keep check on the breach of human rights. But frankly, if you want to know what the blob looks like, what the
one world government, really, or the desire for it. Yeah.
They're exactly part of it.
Yes.
I'm not saying that there is a big conspiracy in the background, but people behaving this way. Take, for example, the chairman of Columbia University, the Baroness, what's her name? Manouche, something or other. These people occupy certain positions in society. They sit on the board of the museums, like she does for the British Museum, and they work in a kind of environment, and they swap from one institution to the next. And this whole thing is a very small club. It's a closed club, and you end up producing whatever you touch. You actually turn into pure crap, and you're pouring all that on society, and you effectively divulging the kind of mentality you have, this kind of inability to recognize what's evil and what's good, and you fudge everything by not taking a position. As you said at the beginning, Morgan, there's a bit of bad in everyone. So by doing that, you bring down the good. By saying that, it's only the people and the institution who are trying to do good that gets smirched in the process.
Yeah, I think Ayn Rand identified, I wrote down the 3 steps that she typically points out occurs. People see some good in the worst of us, then that leads to some bad in the best of us, and then that leads, there's got to be some bad in the best of us. And that's the destruction of virtue that takes place through these steps. How do people respond to Amnesty International these days? I think it depends. I think it depends on who you are. I think it reinforces the tribal prejudices and positions that people have already got. So they'll use an organization such as this to bolster their argument if they already agreed with the idea that Israel was an apartheid state, for example, or whatever. So they'll use it to bolster that argument. But equally, I think there has been a general trend towards people being aware that lots of these organizations are peddling the same stuff. They're peddling the same set of agendas, and you're properly bored with those agendas, and you've seen the destructive effects of them, the nihilistic effects of them. So people are guarded when it comes to organizations like Amnesty International to some level, but it's working in 2 different directions simultaneously. So it's very hard to take a read on what a considered opinion is of Amnesty International, and whether people treat any of this with the the strength that they wish it to be treated, particularly since within the circles of Guardian readers and New York Times readers, I'm sure they're double thumbs up. But anybody else is going who's with any discerning ability is going to question the source of it, and also question the omissions that are there when it comes to pointing out what various countries in the world aren't criticized for and should be.
And we have 299 from Henrik. Sorry, Alejandro. Thank you, Henrik. Go ahead, Alejandro.
So I wanted to talk about the minestrone soup that Marco was talking about. And I think one of the flagrant things that you can see here is if whoever wrote this, but in general, the whole agreement between there has been some kind of agreement with the people who wrote this. And what you see is a mishmash of different things that have either different qualities or different standings of truth, and yet they're all shown here as if they had the same value, the same characteristic, the same perilous characteristics towards human life. And one of the things that we haven't mentioned is that they make statements about big tech being one of the things that are going to make the world worse in the next year. They mentioned this, that during a landmark years of elections and in the face of the increasingly powerful anti-regulation lobby driven by and financed by big tech actors, really? Are they really anti-regulation? Anyways, these rogue and unregulated technological advances pose an enormous threat to all of us because they can be weaponized to discriminate, disinform, and divide. Now, grant this, that they are doing that, which is not true. Is that on the same degree or standard than what is happening with the Uyghurs in China? Or is it as perilous as what's happening in Iran or in Russia? And they have no qualms to saying this, and to put it as one of their key supporting facts, or the things that will that they are raising as the most important things in the report. I think it's so disgusting to read that, but more than their evaluation of the facts, to see such a broken minds that they have no regard to hierarchy, and to the power of what is more important than other things.
Yeah, I mean, you touch on something there, Alejandro. That's what I said. If you want to see what the deep state look like, what the blob looks like, it's this kind of people who work in this environment, who believe in statism. That's why they call for regulation of AI. The thing they want is to split us in little groups and create a warfare between the groups. And we all beg for the state to give us advantage of somebody else. And that's what's deeply wrong with this kind of stuff. It's the premise that the state is good and the collectivist achievement will actually shine through. This is so wrong. This is so goes against the whole purpose of Amnesty International, which is to protect human rights. And human rights are effectively the right of the individual to live its own life.
Yes, and there's a debate going on in the chat that I wanted to see what you guys thought about the idea of human rights versus individual rights, because this is something that's come to my mind, is that groups like Amnesty or the UN and so on will stake their claim that they are defenders of rights, but they're defender of human rights, which as a kind of idea, as a name, sounds pretty innocuous. But there's something that I always think about, is that there's something distinct about the fact that they'll refuse to use the term individual rights, and that when individual rights does get brought up, it's conspicuous by its rarity, in effect. And I just do you guys think there is a kind of a flaw in the idea of human rights versus the idea of individual rights?
Yes.
Yeah. Why?
Yeah, I think one of the things when human rights were started to be discussed and published and gather their status was, if I remember correctly, in the late 1930s, early 1940s, and I think they're a mismatch of several things. And let's return to the issue of really confused people, where there were conflation of things that are rights, like freedom of speech, but things that are also not rights, like which are desirable but not rights, like having an education, having a nice and peaceful environment. Those two things are things that are desirable and everyone should pursue, but they're not provided by nature. And the third one is truly legitimate things. The right of self-determination of peoples, which translates to the right that if a group of people chooses to have a dictator, then the rest of the people who didn't choose it in that country have to be bound by that. And I think there is a sense, and people that defend human rights to that extent smell that whenever one is invoking individual rights, there is a rejection to the illegitimate and the non-rights things, which maybe are desirable, and that's why they try to distance themselves from that.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of human right in itself packaged deal collectivism in there, because it's talking about the human race, the rights of the human race, not the single individual which makes up the human race. And I actually called up the definition that Amnesty gives. What are human rights, says its website. Human rights are the fundamental rights and freedom that belong to every single one of us. Fair enough. And then it goes on saying the 30 articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights form the foundation of what we do. There you go. You start well. The first line is good, but then you effectively reveal what you're after. You're after a definition from the articles of the the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which effectively embeds the idea that effectively you serve the state. You're not an individual. You're part of a bigger thing, and you got all sorts of duties and this kind of, as Alejandro pointed out, fake rights. The only right that you human have, because we're humans, is the right and sovereignty into our own life. And from that derives every single other right. But the right to have an education, the right to have a nice car, the right to have a job, these are not right. This is a shopping list. That's as Alejandro said, desirable stuff. But these are goals. They if you have a certain value, try to achieve.
And when they're expressed as rights, they become the right to violate the rights of others.
Yeah.
And that's the problem there. And of course, the other thing that's not, you won't find in any of these documents, along with individual rights referenced at least hardly ever, is the right to property, right to your own property, which is the natural next step from the right to your own life, the right to retain the product of your own effort. And of course, it's all about global inequality, deepening global inequality, and the like. So you can see very clearly where it's coming from. It's coming from a collectivist, egalitarian perspective that is the absolute opposite of the individual, which is why the individual is nowhere to be seen,
wiped out. Yeah.
Mm. I think you put your finger on it, Marco, when you said it was a package deal, which I hadn't thought of before, but I think that's right. Because when you say to people, if you were to critique the idea of human rights, or to say, I think there's something wrong with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, kind of the first thing is people's eyes will go wide, and they'll look at you suddenly like you're Pol Pot or something, or that you might be in favor of that kind of thing. And someone made a comment in the chat, again, getting at this kind of thing, that it puts in there together the idea of individual rights to some degree, because all humans are individuals, but then also managed to smuggle in the collectivized idea of rights, because also humans can be thought of as a collective. And when you're thinking about, I don't know this, but this is how I'm imagining it. When they were drafting kind of these ideas of human rights, they must have known the context of there already being the concept of individual rights. And they clearly thought there was something deficient about it that they needed to differentiate from this idea of human rights. And that should, I think, cast them in suspicion straight away. And I think it's probably been quite a detrimental idea, although probably human rights have been invoked at times to do good things in certain places. But when you're really trying to push for the idea of individual rights, and you have to come out against human rights, because in the sense that, let's say, the branding is so good, or the communications in the sense of how they're framing it, it's very hard to get through to people that there's something wrong here, because in people's minds, human rights kind of shine out as a beacon of moral authority and in the protection of rights, even though if you really dig into it, there are various violations. And that's that loops back around to Amnesty International again, where their kind of PR stands that if they pronounce condemnation of something, almost uncritically, it'll register in people's minds as, oh, there's something really worth paying attention to here. And it makes it a bit of an uphill battle. But okay, we're just in the final few minutes. Any other thoughts, guys?
Well, just on the last point you mentioned there, I remember, and I'm doing this from memory, so forgive me if I don't get it bang on, but when Ayn Rand was asked in a Q&A about humanism and objectivism, she made exactly that point, which was that if you think of humanism as about the individual human, then objectivism is the philosophy that is the answer to that. But if you think about humanism as being the collective, then objectivism is the absolute antithesis of what is what it's arguing for. So it's a long-standing issue, and this is just a rebadging of it, isn't it?
I haven't had the time to check various papers from different countries, but I suspect that the nature of this report is such that every lefty organization on the planet will use this report to bash their own government, especially if it's a right-wing government or not a lefty government. So I expect to find lots of this kind of titles. Probably most countries, like probably Spain, Italy, don't really care about this kind of stuff as much as we do. But I'm sure you're going to find those kind of headlines across the world. And as I said, the nature of the report itself is done by country, so that all the activists in a certain country can take part of the authority, given to them by the brand Amnesty International, and use it to do politics and do activism and occupy universities and do all this kind of crap, which effectively this kind of organization are fostering and fomenting.
Yeah, it gives them the unearned prestige of quoting a body like that and reflecting on themselves some of that.
Yeah, I think the word is parasitism.
Which, yeah, more frankly, yeah.
Alejandro, any final thoughts?
I do. I think one of the things that we discussed today is that one of the characteristics of Amnesty International is that sometimes in its report, it brings up countries and judges with the different stick, so that it appears that he is judging them with the same stick. That is, that it makes no distinction with the kind of human rights violations in the UK with the kind of human rights violations in Iran and so on. And one of the things that we could do is trying to do the exact opposite, but with this kind of institutions. We have talked in the past about BDS, World Central Kitchen, UNRWA, the UN, and I think that they have different characteristics to Amnesty International. I don't have a full answer to that, so maybe it will be a homework for all of us and the viewers. But certainly the image that I have in my view of Amnesty International is similar to those of the readership of The Guardian. People who are very eager to go to the Amazon and just plunge their arm into the river so that piranhas can eat it, so that they can feed some fishes in the water and serve their purpose as sacrificial animals. And I don't think that's the characteristic that brings into mind with BDS, for instance. However, what do they have in common? And one of the things that what stuck to me while reading this is that they don't have anything positive to offer. They don't argue in favor of anything. When they ask for a ceasefire, they don't propose something new. They don't bring anything in proposal. We all know that this is a very violent situation, and violent that it's in by its own nature. It's not going to offer peace in itself. What does Amnesty International propose? Nothing. And that's another thing that is very common to what has other of these institutions and NGOs that we have talked in the past. And what could bring a movement which doesn't bring anything positive, but just a set of commandments of negatives? And very usually is that what they offer as what they have in reality as the positive, as what they want to achieve, is something so hideous, so awful, that they don't want to flesh out into reality. And sadly enough, because I was hoping that Amnesty International wasn't part of this, but I think they're an anti-Western, anti-Israeli institution. And that is what is common with UNRWA, with BDS, and many other institutions and NGOs that bring this into pledge.
And that absence of proposing solutions is part of its evasion of the existence of evil, real evil, and the fact that it assumes you can negotiate your way out of it, and therefore all of its attention is directed at those people who could capitulate, who will listen, who will put it in their newspapers, as opposed to the regimes which really foster the terrorism, the torture, and the destruction of human life across the globe.
In a way, you can understand why they don't stop and read their own report and start trying to work out what's the solution, because in doing that, they will see their own reflection in the mirror. They would realize that they are the problem. They are fostering most of these problems. And, very few people, you would have to be really, really morally strong and really, really courageous to do something like that.
And we just have one or two more super chats. So we have £3 from Kathleen. Thank you, Kathleen. And then $2 from Bonnie, who says, thank you for addressing this issue. And so, folks, I would say of the various things we've said, just a key thing to take away is don't be taken in by branding. and Amnesty International has a tremendously good name amongst an awful lot of people, and they may well criticize evil people for doing evil things sometimes. However, that you can't just be lulled in, and as Marco said, take them on authority no matter what they say. You shouldn't really treat anyone like an authority like that, in the sense of not exercising your critical faculties. But unfortunately, so much of the way that the media works is that they'll see something put out by some of these NGOs or a very study that's done, that sometimes they'll put out a kind of slapdash article about it with a sort of vaguely misleading headline. And again, what you end up coming out with, even if it's not in the initial report, which it is here, is moral equivalence. And for all the reasons we've said, that's completely destructive. But we'll wrap up. Unless, Richard, did you have something final to say there?
No, absolutely. I was it showing on my face? I was thinking about the organizations such as the Resolution Foundation in the UK, which I can spot a headline from the other side of the room that I know is a Resolution Foundation report rewritten into a headline, because that's an example of a group that is always arguing for equality and trying to stoke intergenerational warfare, which is a similar sort of thing within a domestic setting.
Okay. You looked like you had something on the tip of your tongue.
Yes.
We have one last minute super chat from Mumu.jo for $10. Thank you. Who says, self-sovereignty is limited as well. As long as there is more than one human being on earth, society dictated what rights you have. That is why we need to be careful of the values we allow to be spread.
I disagree.
That sounds a touch vague to me, but thank you very much for your super chat. But all right, guys, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We'll wrap up now. Alejandro, where can people follow you on social media or find your work?
I think what I've been trying to advertise lately is the previous works that I did for ARCUK UK about the Ayn Rand's essays. You can see it here in this channel as a playlist. So I would love that you take a look at that.
Yeah,
for sure.
I would definitely second that, and check out the essay, The Cult of Moral Greyness, among those, particularly in relevance to what we discussed today. For our part, you can look at the Briefly Objective, the sister channel to this. Check out the edited videos on there, distilled versions of some of the discussions on this channel. They get to the heart of an issue and in a bite-sized form for your social media feed and quick understanding of the core essentials in any given element of particularly the war in Israel.
For sure. And you can find my Twitter and Substack in the description as well. I hope we'll see you guys all tomorrow for the Daily Objective and the reality show. We'll be talking a bit about the campaign for anti-Semitism and the walk they're planning to do on Saturday, I believe, in London to protest what happened last week with Gideon Falter, which should be a good episode. So I hope we'll see you all there. Bye-bye. And thank you very much.
Bye. Cheers.
And we're done.